Good morning, everybody. This is Professor Savini. It's Tuesday morning, actually the afternoon, 12:40. Forgive me, I am a little bit behind, am I not? I'm sorry I haven't posted the readings yet. I'm just going through them. They should be up momentarily for our next module, number 6. I wanted to give you some preliminary feedback and introduction into 6. On 5, I think most of you did very, very well. There was a lot of good discussion. But let me just bring something forward. For some of you, not all, right? Some of you are either tied to an ethical framework, and you kind of live by that day to day, and you don't waver from it. And there's nothing wrong with that, okay? You tend to see this with younger people. Also those who might have that personality of being so ingrained that that's the only framework they use. Others now kind of flip-flop in what I call cherry pick. And if you want to go back, you can read some of the back and forth Michael and I have had on this. I think in either case, you've got to be careful, right? I've always said you should not just use one ethical framework in all cases. You might want to use some different frameworks to see what would be a moral or ethical outcome, okay? So don't be tied just to one all the time. Conversely, be careful for those of you that are highly flexible and practice Pilates or yoga, jumping from one framework to another, because as much as you think you're objective, check yourself, because you very well may be rationalizing, looking to find a framework that suits the desired outcome you want. In Module 5, I'm hoping that you identified what your core values are that underpin that framework or those frameworks that you use. This should have also come out in your paper. Now, some of you did an exceptionally good job writing your papers, very introspective. You identified biases, weaknesses, whether they were specifically mentioned in your paper or general, you at least identified them, and you came up with some type of corrective action plan. A few of you, however, had some difficulty in digging deep. And my concern for you is either you're being naive, that you're never going to confront a situation where you will be tested ethically and morally, and that you are sufficiently braced for that event, or you are purposefully ignoring something in your life that you shouldn't because it is a weakness, it might be painful. But in either case, okay, by not knowing now what biases and weaknesses you have, or not addressing them, at least not bringing them forward and not working on correcting them, you will have difficulty. I'm thinking of the cynic. Many of you now, and I've read your posts, some of you, like me, have seen horrible corruption. We've seen bad people get away with bad things and make a lot of money. We're seeing it now. We read about it all the time. The problem for the cynic is we say to hell with it. Well, I don't care what, I'm just not even going to bother anymore. We have to be careful, because as cynics, we need to fall back in love with our profession, back in love with concepts of, honesty, integrity, competence. So Module 5 and the paper, I'm hoping, helped you identify these things, even if they're painful and you don't want to talk about them. Sooner or later you will, because if you don't grow, and you'll be repeating similar mistakes, job to job, relationship to relationship, okay? This leads me as a perfect segue into 6. 6 now, we want to talk about 2 primary ethical frameworks: utilitarianism and then the deontological, right? Deontological. They are, of course, separate frameworks. The utilitarian one benefits basically the broad populace, what's best for the people, okay, in general. And then the deontological framework is really predicated on obligation and duty, right? What are we required to do? So my question here is, for those of you who shift from framework to framework, does that in any way undermine or increase your virtue? How do you view that? I'd like to see maybe you even address this in your discussion threads. I should probably put a prompt or 2 in there regarding this. I think I will. So, for example, for those of you that go from one to another, if you claim to be a utilitarian or you follow that framework, right? Do you only do it or follow that framework if you have a prerequisite duty or obligation? Because absent the obligation, you might say, there's no sense in me looking out for the greater good of the people, right? I'm not required, to follow GAP, for example, or, I'm not going to take a certain adjustment to a journal entry because, hey, I'm not required to. I ain't going to do it. So, what are the connections, or are there any connections between duty and utilitarianism, okay? Or are they, if you will, standalone frameworks that, you yourself can apply? And I think you could go even the opposite way, moral obligation, duty, following the deontological approach. Do you only perform your duty because it's going to benefit the greater good, or you forego the duty? For example, again, taking maybe an adjustment to an account, and you say to yourself, look, it's immaterial. I'm not going to make the adjusting journal entry because it's not going to matter to the financial statement user, so why do it? But let's say you have a company policy or procedure that requires you to do it. So it goes either way. But my point is, do we look beyond ourselves? And if so, how do we increase virtue? And how do we make sure that the frameworks we use don't undermine our virtue? I kind of believe that if you know what your core values are, no matter what framework you're using or adopting, you should come out pretty consistently from life event to life event to life event, right? It's the person who's unsettled in their core principles, okay? Now sometimes we might change. As we get older, we might change, from lichen blue to going to pink or whatever, and that's fine. But that's usually a gradual progress in life. Sometimes it's a cold turkey kind of decision too that you make, I understand. But typically, our values underpin our decision making, our critical thinking, the ethical frameworks we use. But remember, you've got to guard against rationalization. And in some of your posts, I'm not going to name who you are, some of you are very good, very artful in your writing. You could probably write, poetry, right? Standing on your head. I get it. But you think Professor Savini doesn't see through that? I sure do, because I probe and I want to challenge you, right, to become better, to become virtuous. Okay, so another thing I want you to look at in the readings, Kant's idea that you need a moral duty in order to, or a motive rather, in order to perform. he's basically saying, look, we're animals, okay? A lot of what we do instinctual, doesn't require critical thinking, doesn't require an ethical framework. So I think he uses a spider and a beaver, pretty interesting creatures, wouldn't you say, to compare us to. And he says, but unless there's a motive, morality really isn't involved. It's not. So think about that. Do you believe that's true? Is it, just because you might be inclined to give money to the homeless on the street, does that really make you moral? What is the motive? I think Kant would suggest. So the other thing is, what if you're inclined not to give money to the homeless on the street, but yet you feel that there's a moral duty to do so? I think Kant would then say, okay, you're doing something moral now because you're going against your natural inclination, right? But that creates a struggle. And I think Kant makes a really good point. If we're not struggling between our ethical requirements, whatever framework we're using, I don't know. I mean, in my life, I can say that there have been a few times when I've been challenged between what I was inclined to do and what I was morally required to do. And it's difficult. I go back to the core principles, of course, that kind of made the decision for me. But what do you say? Do we need motives to be moral? Okay? Or can you just naturally be a moral person, as Kant would probably argue against? Okay? So, I'm not going to hold you up. I always say this, I know you're busy. Thank you for the time and attention you're putting into the class. For some of you on your posts, what I'm noticing is, and I don't know if it's schedule implications or something else, you tend to reply to posts later, like on the last day. Understand that you then forego an opportunity to engage in dialogue with your colleagues in class. You forego helping others see a different perspective and maybe change their minds, including myself. So you're not adding as much value. So if that's the case, that will probably be reflected in your score. So what does Professor Savini suggest? As best as you can, jump into some of these conversations earlier. And don't be afraid. We have a safe space here. You're a really good group. Exceptionally civil, polite, good. You're biased like all the rest of us, right? But you're keeping an open mind. And I'm really enjoying these discussion threads, okay? So keep that in mind, okay? If you're concerned about points, honestly, it's a grad level course. They're pretty much 2 grades you're going to get, 1 or 2 grades, right? Unless you totally bomb out. And I have failed graduate students before, trust me. It's not hard to do, okay? I don't like it. We don't have that problem in this class. But if you want to get the highest grade possible, you better muscle up, okay? You know what I'm talking about. Muscle up, okay? So with that being said, any questions, you know how to reach me. The journal entry issue should be fixed now. I'm seeing some posts going in there. I took a quick look. They look good. I want to thank ISTS, okay? But anyway, folks, have a wonderful week. One of you is getting married. Have a wonderful wedding day. If you're going on a honeymoon, enjoy it. I wish you my very best. For those of you that have suffered through the bad hurricane, again, my condolences. I hope you're doing okay. If there's anything else I need to know about, okay, reach out and touch me, and I'll promise to get back to you. Stay well. Bye-bye.